Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for this panel discussion. I guess good afternoon or good evening to any colleagues that are joining us from elsewhere in the world. We appreciate you being with us live for this really important topic as we wrap up the fall portion of the Midwest Climate Summit today. My name is Jeff Henderson. I'll be your moderator for the next 75 minutes or so. I'm the Associate Director of Marketing, Communications, and Education at the Institute for Sustainability and Energy at Northwestern University, just outside of Chicago. We go by ISON. I am joined by two really fantastic panelists today, Ian Adams at Clean Energy Trust and Jennifer Mefford at the National Electrical Contractors Association of Southeastern Michigan and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 58. I'll introduce them more thoroughly in a moment, but first I wanted to orient us all to our session topic and the cadence of this conversation. You're joining us for the fourth session of the Teaching and Education track of the summit, in which we've been working to identify, understand, and assess education needs and capacity building in both the academy and community, and how we can ensure our transition to carbon neutrality can be done in a fair and just way for our workforce stakeholders. Today's panel is titled "A Rising Tide Must Lift All Boats, Redefining Workforce Development in a Green Economy to Ensure a Just Transition." And if you've joined us for any of our three prior sessions, first off, thank you, welcome back. But you'll also recall that our center thus far has centered on tools and skill sets for the next generation of climate professionals, those that are currently enrolled in college. This is an area that's obviously very close to my heart personally here at Northwestern, as I've had the privilege to work with an array of undergraduate and graduate students for the past decade, each of whom has shared a common concern and passion about issues related to climate and energy and sustainability. It's been particularly exciting to watch the higher ed space, with institutions recently stepping up with commitments to establish interdisciplinary climate schools to align efforts around research and education. I'm thinking about announcements recently from Stanford and Columbia quite specifically. That's not the focus of our conversation today. Really important, but today we'll be discussing opportunities to leverage and retool highly skilled Midwestern workforces to meet the needs of a growing new energy economy, particularly in those areas where retraining, education, credentialing programs can help counter the impact of declines in traditional manufacturing fields and to a certain extent the fossil industry as well. This is a period of uniquely turbulent disruption for the global economy, both on a short-term basis because of COVID, but more structurally as we push forward as well at unprecedented speeds on decarbonization. As we'll discuss shortly, there is really tremendous opportunity for a new energy workforce that will benefit from the focus of our teaching institutions on embedding core climate and sustainability competencies across the curriculum. That all being said, building a competitive and an equitable green economy means not just looking forward at the next product of our four-year institutions, but also building capacity in the backbone of the American labor workforce, which already has many of the closely related skills that this new climate, new energy economy will require. It's also critical that we keep an eye on equity and diversity within our workforce to ensure that those benefiting from these career pathways are reflective of our broader communities, particularly as we recognize that poorer and disenfranchised communities, many of which are predominantly of color, have and will bear the disproportionate brunt of our historical environmental legacy and our future climate exposures. Before we begin, I want to cover a few logistics to make sure that everybody's experience today is as seamless as possible. First off, a reminder that our workshop is being recorded. Second, when you registered, you may have had an option or seen that in some of these past panels, we have broken out into sessions to more actively discuss tangible opportunities, challenges, obstacles related to the topics. We're in a little bit more of an intimate group today, so I'm going to bypass that. I'm going to keep everyone together for a moderated Q&A session with our excellent speakers, and we'll get to some of the same takeaways through that process. That will transition us nicely into the third bit of logistics, which is up here on the screen. That's Zoom tips. I hope you'll all forgive my orientation here. I realize, I think I looked it up, this is actually our 250th day on remote lockdown, so I'm sure we're all experts by now, but that being said, you can see that everybody is muted when they join. If you need to, you can unmute yourself in the lower left toolbar. You can also participate actively during the discussion in the chat box. Robert's on with our WashU support team and is going to be synthesizing those questions for me as I moderate our Q&A conversation. You are also welcome and encouraged to ask questions of each other, to share information, to welcome each other, and also introduce yourself to the other folks that are here. You'll also note in that chat box during the process of our conversation today that there may be links to reports or organizations that are mentioned throughout so that you can follow up a little bit later. If you open your participants window, you can raise your hand, but we'll see how Q&A goes. I don't know that we'll need to do that. You can also participate non-verbally though by using the reactions feature in the lower toolbar. Finally, you can select the gallery view that you want. You can either have speaker focus, so I may be a massive head on your computer right now, but you can also focus on all participants in small video boxes. I will use this as an opportunity to say that no one's feelings are hurt if you want to sit back and listen and just turn your video off. If you are asking a question though, we would ask that you turn your video on just so the speakers can see who they're speaking with. Finally, if you've joined any of the summit sessions in October and November already, you'll note that we've got an inverted schedule today. So our expert panelists are preceding the workshop plenary speaker. So we're scheduled to wrap at 11:15, but I hope that you'll all hang around and join the summit participants to collectively wrap the fall summit with Justin Gillis, who is formerly the Page One environmental and climate reporter for the New York Times. I've met Justin, I've heard him speak, and I can assure you it's well worth your time. We'll post a link on a slide in front of you to access that session. You'll just click, you'll go directly to the Summit live stream. At the end of this conversation, you won't be joining a new Zoom meeting or anything like that. So with that checklist aside, let me formally introduce our two panelists as we get started. First of all, Jennifer Mefford is the Director of Business Development for the Southeastern Michigan Labor Management Cooperation Committee. She is tasked with business development across traditional and new market sectors on behalf of the National Electrical Contractors Association of Southeastern Michigan and IBEW Local 58. Jennifer serves as the national co-chair for the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Training Program, EVITP. We'll put that link in the chat. A coalition of automakers, utilities, EV service equipment manufacturers, and other stakeholders that deliver EVSE installation training and certification throughout the United States and Canada, both for the residential, commercial, public, and fleet markets. Jennifer also serves as the Director of Workforce Development and Outreach for a coalition of union construction employers and union trade organizations in Southeast Michigan called Must Careers, Construction Careers. We'll put the link for that as well. Jennifer works with educators, career placement professionals, students, and parents to elevate connectivity with trades, apprenticeships, and construction careers, and with companies seeking to develop stronger, skilled talent pipelines. She'll speak second, but let me introduce Ian Adams, who will be our first speaker. Ian is the Managing Director of Clean Energy Trust. As Managing Director at Clean Energy Trust, Ian leads efforts to identify new innovations, evaluate new investment opportunities, and he delivers on strategic initiatives to support early stage innovation. In addition, he provides strategic support for companies within the Clean Energy Trust portfolio and serves as a board observer for 6 of those companies. Previously, he served as an aide to the US Secretary of Energy and has worked at the White House. He began his career on President Obama's first presidential campaign. He completed his undergraduate studies here in Illinois in economics and political science at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and stayed home for his MBA at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. With that, I will hand it off to Ian and take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeff. I should really say I came back home for business school. I was in DC for a number of years, but wanted to come back to the Midwest and happy that I did. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about our work and some of the work we do with clean energy jobs and some of the trends that we see today. So give me just one quick second to share my screen. All right, that look okay to everyone? Great. Well, I'm really happy to be here. Thanks again for having me. Thank you, Jeff, for facilitating here. My name is Ian Adams. I work at Clean Energy Trust, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we do and how we think about workforce education as part of our work, and then sort of what else we see out there when it comes to clean energy trends in the industry, how that influences the workforce here in the Midwest, and some of the data that we've collected on this. So just a little bit about our work. You know, my organization is a nonprofit that provides catalytic capital and support to early stage startups working in clean energy and sustainability across the Midwest region. So we make investments in the work of entrepreneurs. We invest in companies, but we're structured as a nonprofit so that we can provide more support to them and provide entrepreneurial education and training, professional development skills, and connections for folks that work at those companies. So we work specifically in the Midwest, sort of Pittsburgh to Denver, and we really sit in this region because when the organization was founded, it was really founded with a focus on helping support the clean energy ecosystem in the Midwest. Some folks had seen some of the ecosystems that had developed in other parts of the country, like namely the San Francisco Bay Area and Boston, where between those two areas, a lot of innovation is occurring. There's a lot of clean energy work there. A majority of funding for startups in the country goes to those two geographies. And if you look at the Midwest, there's a lot happening here as well. You've got great research universities. You've got tons of large corporate, Fortune 500s. You've got a lot of talented people. You've got great universities churning out engineers and other important degrees. You've got a strong workforce, manufacturing base. You've got national labs. But unlike in like the Bay Area or Boston, where you could take transit or drive across the way to connect with folks, that's a lot harder to do in a more broad geographic region. It's not practical to expect somebody who's working in Anderson, Indiana, which by the way has like a top of the line world-class battery innovation center, to wander down the street to the Denver, Colorado area, which also has fantastic assets at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And so some of what we do is just help weave that ecosystem together and help make identify partnerships and career opportunities. Our model actually invests in entrepreneurs, and we help them bridge the gap between sort of where they're at, typically coming out of universities and commercializing research and development, and where venture capital is interested in working with them. And we try to provide a lot of support during that time. So a lot of what we're doing is providing entrepreneurial training to early stage entrepreneurs, many of which come from scientific backgrounds rather than business backgrounds, although it's a mix. So we've invested in several dozen companies over the last 6 years. We also operate programming specifically designed to provide entrepreneurial education for university students, undergrads and graduates, in a accelerator program. And that's a program where we're working with startup companies coming out of universities where the people that are running the companies are still students, and providing them support and entrepreneurial education. And I think it's important to recognize, at this early stage, like a lot of these companies will not be successful. We hope that they all are, we believe that they all can be, but many of them will not be successful for different reasons. Sometimes it's technology, sometimes it's an economic shock. It could be execution issues or unrelated things as well. But I think one thing that is important is that we are providing entrepreneurial education and skills and training. So even if somebody working at a company, that company may be fantastically successful and get on the cover of a magazine, or it may not work out that well. But in providing that support and training, largely we find even when those companies do not succeed, folks are staying in this industry and continuing on, and they're gaining skills in the process when it comes to entrepreneurship. But importantly, these companies are doing well as well. These companies that we've invested in employ more than 600 people in the Midwest. And we're also happy that in doing so, more than half of the companies we've invested in have female or minority founders. So that's a little bit about our work and really, our focus on entrepreneurial training and how we can provide support that is useful for companies, but is also providing a skill set, and we think helping crowd in employment in the region. So I want to pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about a few trends that we see that will probably be very familiar to you and like how they are influencing clean energy jobs in the Midwest. So first, probably not a surprise to anyone that's on this conversation, but renewable energy is growing really dramatically. And it's largely growing now because it's cheap. It's the cheapest option. You know, we are essentially really at the beginning of this. You know, right now in the United States, more than 3/4 of new energy generation that's created is wind and solar. And long term, we would expect to see, you know, in that range, you know, 2/3 of clean energy over the next several of the energy generation mix will be wind and solar over the next several decades. And so we're really in, you know, this is an industry that has grown significantly, employs a lot of people, but we're in really early days. And so these are areas that are really going to boom going forward. You know, our economy is getting more efficient. This is not something that is necessarily as salient as the wind turbine that you drive by on the highway, but little by little, the economy has been getting more and more efficient. And this has been the case actually for decades. You know, average energy consumption, electricity consumption used to be growing at about 10% a year, and then it was growing at 5% a year, and then it was growing at 2% a year. And one thing that is interesting that happened about 20 years ago is electricity consumption and gross domestic product, you know, sort of like the growing economy, started to decouple. And so it used to be the case that like the economy grew, we used more energy. And, you know, people like using less energy, but they understood that those things grew together and people want the economy to grow. There's lots of good reasons for that. But what we're seeing now, because of more efficient products, because of building codes and standards, because of policy that is driving this, is our energy demand is growing barely at all. You know, in some areas it's pretty much flat, maybe it's growing 1% or so. And so even as our economy continues to grow, we are not using much more energy, and that's because we are investing in energy efficient solutions. Another trend item that is going to, you may not have seen as much, but will be coming up more in the coming years, is the drive down in the cost of storage. So solar costs have dropped a lot. Storage is just sort of following them down the curve. You know, these are early days as well, and we're expecting to see a lot of deployments of storage, and that will unlock capabilities in other areas, namely vehicle electrification. So you may have seen, you know, an electric vehicle here or there, but we're really just on the cusp here of the electrification of all kinds of vehicles. In the next several years, we're going to see a huge rollout of fleet vehicles, like delivery trucks, like Amazon or UPS, because particularly because of their habits and their particulars, they're utilized a lot. They tend to be on fixed routes. They can, because of that high utilization and some other factors, they can swap out an existing truck and, you know, drop the operating costs over the lifetime by 40 or 50%. You know, so really good deals, and you'll start to see that coming into personal passenger vehicles as well. You know, again, really early days. So even though we are early, there's still a lot of exciting things happening here in the Midwest. You know, these are the energy trends that are driving clean energy job growth in the Midwest. It's energy efficiency, renewable energy generation, you know, declining cost of storage, and the transition to a cleaner vehicle fleet. So what we found, and this is an annual survey that we do called Clean Jobs Midwest, is that there are more than 744,000 clean energy jobs in the Midwest. To put that in perspective, there are more people that work in the clean energy industry in the Midwest and in every state than there are, you know, computer programmers and waitresses and waiters combined. So, you know, you probably are more familiar with waiters and waitresses than you are clean energy employees. But these jobs are ubiquitous. They are all over the place geographically. One nice thing is a lot of these jobs are localized, and so they're not something you can ship overseas. If someone is conducting maintenance on a wind turbine or retrofitting a building, you know, that's something that's going to be a local job, and we need those jobs in, you know, every county in the country. Michigan and Illinois have the largest clean energy job sectors, with each of them have about 125,000 clean energy jobs. And the largest sector by far is energy efficiency. That's that blue bar to the left. That might surprise some folks because I think today, wind and solar are probably the most salient clean energy sources and sort of opportunities when it comes to employment. But there are a ton of folks working in energy efficiency. And one reason that you don't hear about energy efficiency jobs is that those folks may not call themselves an energy efficiency employee. It turns out in some parts of the country, people that install solar panels don't call themselves clean energy employees either. They just call themselves building installers, because in some areas politics gets complicated. So you'd be surprised when you ask people what they do. They don't always identify that way, and that's particularly true in energy efficiency. If you're doing building retrofits, if you are doing building audits, if you're manufacturing more efficient equipment, if you have special certification so that you know how to manage a building's operation and HVAC management system so that it saves energy, those folks aren't necessarily, they don't get up and say, I'm an energy efficiency employee, even though that's really the case. They received specialized training to save energy. That's sort of by definition what they're doing. One thing we're seeing is that, prior to the pandemic, clean energy jobs were really growing. They're growing faster than the economy overall in the Midwest, and had added jobs each of the last 5 years. Although last year there was a dip in advanced transportation jobs. Some of that had to do with some of the timing with who was making electric vehicles and where. Right now, a lot of the electric vehicles on the market are made by Tesla, or that are being sold are made by Tesla. It doesn't have as big a presence in the Midwest, although we should expect that to reverse in coming years as some of the automakers here, particularly in Michigan, are rolling out a lot of new electric vehicles. So some downsides, perhaps unsurprisingly, because of the pandemic, even though 190,000 clean energy jobs were created in 2018 and 2019, more than twice that number of jobs have been lost and not rehired in the clean energy industry since the beginning of the pandemic. Obviously, a lot of sectors have been hit hard, and clean energy is no exception there. Some sectors took a pause in general, and then some others are structurally not a great fit for our lockdown environment. If you're coming in and doing a residential home audit or a home retrofit, that's not the sort of activity that people necessarily want to be doing while they're locked in their homes right now. And we see Michigan and Ohio are a couple of the hardest hit states with double-digit job losses there, but the average is that clean energy jobs have declined by about 12% nationwide. That said, clean energy is still really well positioned to be an important part of the economic recovery and growth going forward. And so one thing that a lot of folks are thinking about is, like, how do we design policies to respond to the pandemic that also helps us rebuild better? I know, President-elect Biden's, one of his slogans is "Build Back Better." I actually created this slide before he came out with that slogan. It's like, how can we do this smarter? It wasn't my idea. This is something that Europe is really taking the lead on. So if you look at where European pandemic response dollars are, they're sort of saying, hey, we need to put people to work. Let's invest in clean infrastructure. Let's get electric vehicle charging going. Let's build more renewables. That hasn't been as much the case in the United States, where there's only been one round of stimulus, but that's something we may be looking for going forward. And then I just want to touch on a few areas where there's rapid growth expected. Wind turbine technician is the fastest growing job in the United States. Solar installers are growing or will be growing, post-pandemic in many states. And in the next several years, because the price of solar keeps dropping, we can expect the Midwest solar industry to really continue to blossom. Right now, a lot of renewables in the Midwest are tied to the wind industry. But the electric vehicle supply chain is also going to be an exciting one. And I think that's one that's going to turn on very quickly as costs continue to come down. And then building trades, building efficiency, a lot of opportunities there. So just to conclude, sort of like when I look to the future, I would say that there are macro trends that are driving clean energy job growth that are not going away. Some of these have been slowed down by crisis. Obviously, a lot of jobs have been lost, not unique to clean energy. But these are trends, electric vehicles are still coming. The growth in renewables is being driven by the fact that they're the cheapest form of energy. And this doesn't even really get into the details of what new policy may happen in the future. I think another trend that you're seeing is that corporations now, because so much has changed just in the last 5 years, they're embracing some of these new solutions because they're saving them money. And so that's really continuing to drive. So like one difference between 5 years ago and now, 5 years ago, the renewables we were building were a good idea and they were pretty affordable. But the reason we were building them was because we had policies in place saying, you need to build renewables, we'll pay you for it. Now, most of it's driven by the private marketplace. And that's an exciting development, because it means that no matter what happens policy-wise, people are doing this because it's cheap, and so that's a good sign that it's going to be an industry that really grows. And like going back to some of those charts I showed, we're really in early days here. So even though clean energy is already a major employer, there's a lot of opportunity going forward for growth and a broad spectrum of sectors and job functions. So I think I will leave it there and turn it back over and look forward to hearing Jennifer's remarks.
Excellent. Thanks, Ian. So obviously there are a ton of questions that I have around trends in workforce development. I'm going to hold them right now. I see that some folks have been asking questions over chat as well, which is great. Please continue to do so. They're being synthesized and we'll incorporate them into a Q&A conversation right after Jennifer finishes, but I'm going to hand it off, Jennifer, to you right now. We'll do about another 15-minute presentation and then we'll have a good chunk of time for Q&A.
Great, thanks everyone. Excited to be here with the group today. Love the information that Ian just presented. I think it really captured where a lot of the markets are right now. And I just wanted to, before I jump into my messages for today, just really support what Ian was saying, what we're seeing with EV. Sitting here in the Motor City and looking at all of the activity that we've had within the last 12 months, converting traditional auto manufacturing plants to all electric manufacturing. So we are putting the finishing touches on Factory Zero, which is a great project that will just be turning out electric vehicles. And we're seeing that really with all of our auto plants kind of certainly within Southeast Michigan, but in and around Michigan. From our industry, we kind of always look for the automotive industry typically is on a 2 to 4 year cycle in terms of design and production. So now that we're actually building those plants, what I'm seeing is this shift and looking at the supplier base shifting and changing. They're really going to do it, right? So the plants are done, the manufacturing capability is there. Ford and General Motors are investing. I think GM's number was 20 billion in electrification facilities. Ford is very close to that number, but Ford is announcing really that they're committed by 2022 to have over 40 different fully electric vehicles in their portfolio. So, those industries don't turn quickly, right? So those things have been in design and in planning for a long time. So I'm very optimistic with what I'm seeing come out of the automakers right now, the diversity of EV vehicles, frankly. The announcement last week, kind of the rollout of the 2022 Ford e-Transit, which is really built for industry, right? It's 60 different configurations that you can have in this vehicle. As Ian said, fleet vehicles are really a perfect space for EVs. They're on a fixed route generally. They can charge at a home port, at their home base for their business. It's a really efficient model, and it's exciting to see all of the announcements that will be coming in terms of vehicle diversity, because that really just speaks for longevity and adaptation. So I agree with the numbers that we're seeing. That those numbers are just going to continue to grow, and we're going to see really, I think, just some significant and very exciting changes in the automotive industry. So with that being said, I'm having a little technical on my issue, guys. It seems I'm not advancing my slides. So I'm going to try that again in a second, but I want to share with you today a little bit about our perspective. So my background is in, I work for a large group of electrical contractors and a workforce that are all union electricians. Much of my work for them is around new market development, which includes, energy storage, wind, solar. And I'm going to stop this share just for a second and maybe try that again and see if we can pull it up and try it a different way. See if we can do it that way. Yes? Good? Are we seeing my, all right, look at me, technology, here we go. Okay, so we have around 750,000 union electricians across our North American footprint, 16,000 electrical contractors, and around 300 apprenticeship training centers. Apprenticeship training centers train our new people new to the industry, but they also do journeyman continuing education, which is part of our conversation today. So this is who we are. And, I think to Ian's point, most of our folks in our industry wouldn't identify themselves as in green jobs, right? They wouldn't identify themselves as energy efficiency experts, but they do work in all these market sectors all the time, right? As energy and electrical professionals. So that's our network. How we're looking at this 45% number is really representing, I think, opportunity. It's representing opportunity in all these new markets, but opportunity for electrical professionals across the board. Right now, the electrical trade isn't any really different than any other building trade category. Roughly 45% of our existing workforce, our experienced journeymen, are really moving into retirement eligible age, right? That's a big number. That doesn't happen overnight. It's going to happen over a period of 5 to 10 years. But that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of creating new opportunity for folks to come into our industry. This isn't a new number. It's not a new event. We've been tracking this data easily for the last 7 years, kind of looking at moving into that and adding apprentices, which are really new electrical professionals into our industry in much higher numbers to kind of get ready for this. Our model requires that we have full-time employment for folks that we bring in new to the trade. For those of you not familiar with apprenticeships, in the union system, 90% of your experience is in the field and 10% is at one of our training centers doing classroom education and hands-on learning. So it really does depend on the jobs market and the economy. In Michigan, particularly, even through the pandemic, we've seen a very strong economy in construction. Tons of work going on, a lot of it driven by automotive, frankly. There's a lot of that plant work that's been happening in and around Michigan. Detroit is also seeing a tremendous surge of construction in the urban core. So we've been doing everything from housing units in the city to high rises. They're right now working on what will become one of the tallest, if not the tallest, I think it's like within 10 feet of the other one, tallest skyscraper in the city of Detroit, but just dynamic things happening around here. So our picture is very, very robust, which allows us to bring in new folks. When we add in numbers for new energy markets, we look at what's happening in solar and EV and storage and wind in our market, that just increases the opportunity for us to bring in more new people. I was on a meeting yesterday looking at some proposed solar projects just for the state of Michigan, for an example. Right now, there are 740 solar projects of all different sizes that are proposed in Michigan, and that represents about 12,000 megawatts of solar. So that's a lot, right? So they're not all probably going to happen, right? These are proposed projects. But even if a portion of them, 20%, 30%, go into the ground in the next 12 to 24 months, that's a significant amount of work. And as those markets grow, we're able to grow our workforce overall. Our philosophy is really around workforce stability. So as we look at new markets, new energy markets, we look at them as being technologies that are kind of layered onto what's a holistic education and training program for an electrician. So you take a base level of an electrician, our programs are around 5 years to complete. When we do specialty training for new technologies like storage or EV, it's layered into that education. So we've been doing it that way for, the last 10 years as we look at new markets. In our world, it's often just adapting or learning the nuances of a new technology with an electrical foundation. What that means for our workforce, and what I think is really key for us, is that we provide extensive training for a lifelong career in our industry. It isn't really specific on one technology or one market. It can be if you decide to focus your career in that area, but you also have the whole other skill set that we provide as electricians. So you can work in lots of different markets. You're very fluid that way, and you can kind of move to serve different markets. I'll give you an example of how we upskilled our workforce, our existing workforce, around EV with the launch of the Chevy Volt. This was around 2009, 10, and the Volt was one of the first products to come into the market. Sitting here in Detroit, we were very excited. We partnered with General Motors on creating kind of an installation best practice and installation network for them. We trained, around 400 of our journey level electricians with EV specialty to serve that market. And the market did not grow to the extent at that time that we thought, right? Well, those electricians were able to work on other projects, energy efficiency projects, building projects in a more traditional lane, while we've let that EV market expand. The same thing for solar here. We trained around 800 of our existing workforce in around that same time, 2008 to 2011, to get ready for what we hoped would be this tremendous expansion of the solar market in Michigan. We're really today just seeing that happening. So we're ready, like our workforce is ready. But what I love about this model is that we weren't training people just to serve that market that maybe was a little flat for a while. We were training on top of all the other expertise, and we can move our folks into these markets as needed. And I love that model because it really speaks to sustainable careers. We are all about career pathways, lifelong jobs, great pay, benefits, healthcare, retirement, and continuing education. We provide, we subsidize education from the beginning when someone is new and comes into our workforce, and we do that throughout their career. The electrical industry changes all the time, so continuing ed is a huge piece of what we offer, and we just feel it's so important to keep our workforce growing and to keep them the most productive. So we talked a little bit about this. We've also really taken a look in the last several years at, how do we create, we certainly create great field folks, but how do we create degree pathways with the technical expertise that they might get through an apprenticeship that could be expanded into the contractor side of our business, right? And we also understand that the younger folks coming in, and I would say younger, even anyone 40 down, right? Really interested in how many ways can I grow and expand within this career pathway? So if you have a 5-year apprenticeship as a foundation, when you graduate from our program, and this is pretty similar across the country, so it isn't unique to Detroit, you're just shy of an associate degree at several community colleges that we all partner with. We also have 4-year degree programs that apply those credits, right? Many of our contractors will sponsor field staff to go into that 4-year degree program as well. So we're always kind of looking at how can we offer this whole career pathway where you can come in, stay in the field, specialize, move into the contractor side of the business, whatever you really want to do. And, I think that's just a strong statement and a strong way of doing it that keeps people growing and engaged with us as electrical professionals. 98% of our contractors that own our firms came through the apprenticeship, right? They started through an apprenticeship, they started in the field, and then they grew up in the business. So that's kind of what that looks like for us. I mentioned that we tend to train with new technologies or new markets around a certification. We're really big in partnering with as many folks in a market as possible. I'll use an example for our electric vehicle training program that this isn't our program, it's a program that we use, but we've collaborated with all of the automakers, the EVSE manufacturers, utility companies, NFPA, safety professionals, very early on in this industry around that 2008 and 9 program, and said, how do we look at EV as a whole market? We are a piece of that. We're the installer community and planning community. How do we look at that and look at what everybody needs from this market and create what for us comes down to a training and certification that's recognized by industry. We've done that with advanced lighting controls. We're doing it now with energy storage. Energy storage, we see tremendous opportunity for growth there. And we've trained trainers throughout the country, and we're really just deploying that training now at the journeyman level. Zero net energy facilities. We've built several throughout the country, and we do that, one, because we believe it's awesome and the way to go, but two, because we speak to our customers about this all the time, right? And we feel that it's a very strong statement when we create a zero net energy facility for our customers, so we can show them all those different technologies. Most of our zero net facilities by design were really done on older building stock. In the city of Detroit, we took our international headquarters, which is a 1964 building that needed a basic gut remodel to go Z&E. A big investment, but that facility is amazing, and I encourage you to go to zeronetenergymi.com if you'd like to check it out. Happy to talk to you about that project. But this is really our method and our way of working with the workforce. All of our apprentices get to pick and choose which new energy markets they want to kind of specialize in. They get a basic level when they're in the apprenticeship, but in their 4th and 5th year, much like college electives, they can pick, right? So if this is really of interest to them, and on the younger end of our workforce, it certainly is, they can really pick to be more focused in that area. I wanted to also, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about this in Q&A, so I'll just touch on it. Like many industries, we're really looking at how do we create an inclusive environment? How do we recruit differently to diversify our labor force? Right now, my market in Detroit is about 20% minority in our labor force. About 5% of that is women. It varies by trade. It varies around the country. So that's kind of the base that we really want to continue to grow and to really focus on. And one of the things that we found to be most successful for us is really partnering around projects and creating programs that would connect. We've done a lot within the city of Detroit and connect folks to our industry that give them an opportunity to see what we do, not just learn about our craft, but really to have an on-the-job experience and almost like a living job interview, if you will, right? They're interviewing us as much as we're interviewing them. And I'll talk a little about in Q&A if we have time, Jeff, about one of the programs that we're running right now with Ford. But what we have found generally in our industry, because we don't have a dominant presence for females, from a very early, we had to develop a really very strong mentoring program. Makes a huge difference. We have outreach programs just for young women and women to come into the industry, to kind of create a bridge for them to come in what is a very male-dominated industry, right? So I think that I'm going to conclude my comments right now, and hopefully we can touch on some of these specific programs when we're in Q&A. Thanks, Jeff.
That sounds great. And Ian and Jennifer, thank you very much. I wanted to let everybody know that we're going to move into Q&A. A number of you have been putting questions into chat already, so thank you for that. And I'll do my best to incorporate them into these first couple of questions. But we want this to be an opportunity for you all to actively engage with the speakers as well. So please do feel free to raise a hand if you have questions, and I'll do my best to make sure that I can call on as many people as possible. We have had a fair number of questions coming through chat, and Jennifer, I think you queued us up really nicely there with the discussion about diversity and inclusion at the end of your presentation. I don't think it's a secret that the clean energy economy has historically still had diversity problems, and so I'm wondering if you can speak more specifically to particular partnerships. You mentioned the Ford partnership, and maybe let's start there. And I'd be interested specifically in how those policies can address historic inequity that have existed in communities, right? Communities that have lived with multi-generational unemployment, where educational access might have been difficult. So traditional recruitment efforts and partnerships with schools, for example, don't necessarily address systemic issues. Yeah.
So there's a couple of things that we've done that I think certainly you'll find examples like this similarly in markets across the country. In the city of Detroit, we actually worked with several of the other building trades to build out a vocational high school. So the city of Detroit had a vocational high school for decades, but like many areas of the country, it went dormant for another couple of decades, right? So we had a large population of students that really had no awareness of the trades as a career option, right? That facility was completed around 3 years ago. So we actually put an instructor that we funded in that school, right? We have an electrical program that we funded. It's a 2-year program that students from all of the Detroit public schools come into as a feeder. And they're in that program for 2 years. What we found very early in that process, and I think it was a great lesson learned, was that we needed to be prepared to really remediate math, especially algebra skill, with the students that we were getting, as well as reading comprehension. So in our first year, we wanted to make sure that the students that were coming in and committing to the program had the math skill to be able to be successful as electricians. The electrical field is very heavy in algebra, geometry, and trig. So we were simply finding that for us to be teaching electrical wasn't enough. So rather than say, okay, well, what are we going to do? We actually hired a math teacher to be in our classroom, in our electrical classrooms, and we converted some of that curriculum to algebra and math remediation. And we had better success with that, obviously, with student outcomes. And that's really the goal. I think we have to be prepared when we're looking, at partnerships in communities to say, okay, here's what we think is going to work, but here's what we're seeing, and how do we adjust it again? How do we adjust it again? The other thing that, one of the takeaways in the last 5 or 6 years, we started to do a lot of recruitment of city residents around the Little Caesars Arena project that was completed probably almost 5 years ago now in the city of Detroit, one of the biggest construction projects. What we learned there is that we had a lot of adult population in the city of Detroit that had limited work experience. We had huge transportation issues to deal with. How do we get people to the job site? How do we help facilitate that? And how do we help them understand really kind of what this industry is in real time? We had decent success with that project with onboarding city residents into our apprenticeship, which is again, kind of our entry-level full-time employee. Those folks come in just under $18 an hour with benefits. So once they're on that pathway, they just continue to make more and earn more. But we were still seeing, once they were in our programs, up to a 50% rate of dropout. And that is, the exact opposite of what we wanted. And this is really kind of true across any of the building trades that were participating within the city. So we really pulled that apart and looked at it. What we felt would be a great way to go is to offer structured construction awareness classes that are anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks that give a broad overview of all of the different construction trades, but then move those folks into an on-the-job learning experience. I think in our industry, which tends to be large commercial, public, big infrastructure, not necessarily your house or my house, sometimes it is, but predominantly it's bigger stuff. Until you're on those job sites and in an environment where you might be with 2,000 other crafts workers, especially as a minority or a female, you kind of, you need to kind of experience that. So that was a model that we moved to with Ford, in collaboration with many of the building trades and their general contractors. Was Ford is building the Michigan Central Depot, which will become their automation, mobility and EV hub campus for Ford. The Central Depot is an iconic, gorgeous facility that's been dormant for decades and large project, but that campus itself is about $1 billion in development. We looked at folks who had come through some construction awareness training that were all city residents, and especially folks who are in the impact area of that project, which is called Corktown area of Detroit. Went through a process of evaluation and application, and we started cohort 1 on that job site in September. They're in a 20-week paid experience on the job. They can designate a trade if they're interested to work with, and they work with our contractor. They're assigned to journeyman. They have, work assignments every day. They aren't just following people around. or they can rotate trades. So that way they could see what the masonry trade does, right? They can see what a carpenter does. They can see what an electrician does. And then they can really pretty quickly work with our staff to either get placement with that trade, get placed into an apprenticeship, or apply. So the great news, I was on a call yesterday with our team, and of our 20, typically, we started with 25. We're currently at 19. Of the 6 that are no longer with us, 1 dropped out, 5 got hired before the program really started, right in the beginning, into one of the trades. So that was a win. That's not a loss, it's a win. And then we've just had 2 more that were picked up one went into the electrical apprenticeship. So he's left the program, but he went into his career, right? And the other one is doing the same thing with carpentry. So by the end of this 20 folks, I feel like we're going to have high success rates of placement, but more importantly, stickiness. They're going to stay with us because they really understand. They've been on that job site. They understand you're outside. It's dirty. It's chaotic. It's a lot of people. They really do get a really real-time experience. And to me, I think that those kinds of programs help. Regular outreach will net us folks who are interested, folks of color, females, but we have to approach it differently and make sure that we're providing that experience and that support that they may otherwise not have had. So I love that program. It is right now being deployed for Ford, but it is a model that we worked on with lots of collaborators that will be moved from development project to development project, which I love, right? We don't need to reinvent the wheel each time. I think we found something pretty cool to keep expanding. So I'm really excited about that. The next cohort starts in February. So it is smaller batches of workers, but it will grow. Right now, I only have 5 trades on that site. And in February, I'll have 9. So there'll be more.
And Jennifer, let me pick up on one item, and then Ian, I've got a follow-on for you. But as we become more successful in inclusiveness of communities that have historically either been locked out of trades or have been difficult to reach because of systemic issues or anything else, do union members go through any formal D&I training? Do they go through sensitivity training as the workforce begins to look different? And if so, have you seen any results from that training in terms of stickiness within the industry?
I mean, I think that generally, yes, they do. I think we have a lot of work to do. But over the last, I would say 5 or 6 years, when we started really partnering with the city and had very specific goals as an industry to onboard city residents into our programs, we went through a lot of that. A lot of it was looking at these mentoring relationships within our local unions. And what I mean by that, the journeyman relationship with an apprentice on a job site is a mentoring relationship, right? You're on a job site as a new person, you're assigned an experienced person to work with. But it's more looking at our successful minority members and our successful female members and really pairing them up almost as more of a soft mentor, right? I'm your person. I'm here for you all the time to talk about different job sites and really kind of add that human layer. And I think that has worked super well for us. We're not seeing those huge attrition rates. Once we got through kind of the math component, and then we got through just the general, unawareness of what some of these construction sites are like, I think those things all help. I know we have a long way to go. And one of the things I really am excited that we're looking at for 2021 is also how are we expanding? How are we looking at folks of color and women within our organizations and expanding leadership, supervision, foreman opportunities, contracting opportunities, and advancement? And we have some of that. I'm a local that has a female union president. I'm a local that has female trustees, that has female contractors, and folks of color in positions of leadership and decision making. I'm fortunate that way. We just need a lot more of it. So we've been having conversations like many companies about how do we do this better? How can we open up pathways? And how are we just making sure that folks they're already successful, but how do we grow that? And how are there opportunities on that side too? So I think the makeup of this local in Detroit is going to look dramatically different in the next 5 to 7 years. But it's because of these tracks that we've been on for the last 5 to 7 years. And some of them, we're always trying to make it better, to make it look like what it works. We'd love to partner with communities when we go in to do a project. We connect with neighborhood associations, whether under community benefits agreement, or we're just doing outreach, right? That's where our folks come from. So to apply for a program. So there's kind of like an army of people out in the neighborhoods trying to connect, faith-based organizations. I mean, it is at this point really aggressive outreach, and we're seeing how that pays off. But we always need to be open to say, okay, how are we going to deal with transportation, right? How are we going to get folks around job sites when we aren't building something in their neighborhood? Again, that whole career, right? Construction people move around. So how are we going to deal with that in the city of Detroit? We've had contractors who provide transportation. A central hub, workers meet there, that is close to their neighborhood, and we provide transportation to a job site. We're trying to be innovative and creative in how we make this work.
Sounds good. Jennifer, I'm going to queue up the next question so you can think about it while I'm asking this one for Ian, but we've talked a lot about things that have been successful. I'm always curious about the ones that we've tried that have not worked. So I'm wondering if there are workforce development programs that you guys have run that have been scrapped or came up short, and whether or not they were able to be successfully pivoted to something else, or whether or not, it was sort of, we tried this, it did not work, and we'll move on to something else. But Ian, this one's maybe directed at you. We've talked some about outreach to disproportionately marginalized communities, particularly those within these areas that are experiencing job benefits. I know another one that the clean tech industry is really excited about are vets that are either returning from overseas deployments or maybe on National Guard, or folks that have served that bring a lot of skill sets that translate well to the clean energy economy. Can you talk at all about whether or not Clean Jobs Midwest or other organizations that you guys have worked with, any conclusions that are drawn about outreach to the veteran community specifically?
Yeah, good point. And I agree with Jennifer's comments on the sort of general trends. Like there's more work, good progress is being made, and there's more work to be done. One area that has been, I think, a positive story is veterans. So veterans are overrepresented in the clean energy industry. In most states in the Midwest, they're about twice as prevalent in the clean energy industry as the overall workforce. And right, probably a mix of applicable skills, or if you were doing, if you're doing the same work for the military and you came back, it may be seamless. And also there are good programs that exist. The Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, which is a former employer of mine, has a veterans training program where they have corporations that will step up, that are sort of broadly within the space, energy service companies and what have you, that engage with veterans organizations and specifically track hires into those careers as well.
Great.
Excellent. And maybe a follow-on to that then, which is, and this is directed at both of you, but we have spent these first couple of sessions talking about developing a climate literate and a climate expert community coming out of the academy and coming out of traditional four-year programs. I'm wondering whether or not you see opportunities for interaction between the traditional trade relationships that exist and the professionals that we're training in I don't want to say different skill sets, right? But where is the interaction between those two communities, and are there things that that universities specifically can do to either enable that interaction or to better serve the goals of your organizations?
It's an interesting question. I think the way I would probably think about it, I don't know if I have a great answer for you, but I would say like practical skills for many employers, like those practical skills are what are valuable to a lot of employers. And so for somebody coming into the building trade, that they have, an electrician knows how to do electrical work. once you get into a like modern organization, you know, I think that I think people are caring less and less about certain credentials or whether you went to a liberal arts college or had another background, and more about like, are you useful in this professional setting? And so do you have, you know, do you have a set of skills and competencies, and those may be related to building trades and a certain certification there, or they may be other skills, whether it's financial modeling or what have you. But I think like I was on a great talk from the person that used to run people operations at Google just a few days ago. And one of the things that they were saying is like, some of the things that don't predict like successful employees are grades, test scores, where you've worked in the past, whether you have had a lot of different jobs. And I think it goes to like, as I think employers are beginning to realize that, and like people that can interact well with others, that are flexible and have competencies is really where the future workforce is heading.
I agree with that completely. I think that, you know, we talked a little bit about the 45% on the field side of our workforce. That 45% is also pertains to our construction firms. So 45% of their workforce, their estimators, their project supervision, their planners are also at retirement age, right? So from us, we're looking for out of the university community, folks who have construction management degrees, but may have specialty in new markets. I think would be extraordinarily valuable to our construction firms. We have just as much of an outreach that we need and connectivity in that space as well. I do think that communication across the board, communication skills across the board, being able to have conversation, being able to communicate well, being able to listen. On the younger end of our workforce, you know, where it's been much more of an electronic or technology driven communication style, that can be a bit of an issue. Just being able to have conversation with humans, right, face to face, can be a little bit different. And I think that any of those kind of soft skill communication skills are things that, you know, we have incorporated into our apprenticeship to kind of address that. But those are really key. And I think, you know, I think that Ian's comment about kind of resiliency and the ability to pivot, it's great that you have really specific education or skill sets, but you're going to, especially in a construction environment, things change constantly. Projects change, plans change, the way it was drawn isn't the way it's going to be. And just being able to really adapt to that and to change, and when our project is going, like we've seen a ton of this with COVID, this one's running, this one's not today, this one's, you know, and just being able to be comfortable in that fluid environment and apply your skills and apply what you bring as a human to that job, but just know it's going to change. And that change is kind of a normal that we're all living in. You asked about, you know, programs that didn't work. I think for us, it's more, you know, I think we're willing to partner and collaborate and try lots of different approaches. What wasn't working for us was we really misjudged how much we have to remediate math. I don't only see that within the urban center of Detroit. You know, I have a 7-county, very suburban environment around Detroit that I work with, and kind of across the board, no matter what education system they were coming from. Michigan has a 2-year requirement that all students have to complete 2 years of algebra. We have a ton of people turning in transcripts with D minuses. They have no algebra competency at all. I've also seen in the last 3 years really reduced scores in reading comprehension. You know, I was not, when I was with students, parents, teachers, educators, I was always talking math. And if I'm looking at test scores now of who's applying to my program, I'm seeing huge issues with reading comprehension. So either something changed in curriculum deployment, but that has been a significant change. So now I have to talk equally about reading comprehension. We're really willing to, you know, remediate some of that. But in order to be really successful with us, those are just things you're going to have to be really good at. So we, you know, in some of our early workforce programs, whether they were within the city of Detroit, for vets or for specific things, we had to just look at what does this community need and how are we going to address it as their employers, as their union representative, how are we going to take that on? And so now that we've put that in place, anything we're doing is more successful than it was, but those are things we just flat out underestimated. And that was 5 or 6 years ago. So we just underestimated it.
Well, it's close to 11:05. I want to be aware and remind everybody again that at 11:15 we'll break. I also want to give folks a chance to ask questions directly to the panelists. So if you're interested in asking something that we haven't addressed yet, if you want to come off video and come off mute to ask, that would be great. If no one wants to jump out, I won't publicly call on anyone or
All
anything.
right. Hey, this is Beth Mercer Taylor. I was just putting in a ton in the chat. Sorry to overwhelm you. Jennifer,
all.
super interesting to hear what's going so well and your honesty. It's really amazing. And in higher education, probably many of us, we're looking at these being more nimble, doing things that are more like boot camps in the coding software space. And we have a partner in North Minneapolis who's running is minority owned business owner doing a clean energy workforce initiative to address all the issues you're talking about. And we're trying, I come from the state university, but we work with our 2-year system as well. So more of the vocational programs. We're trying to figure out how to do a whole ecosystem where we're doing better with our university grads, with being aware of the kinds of issues you're bringing forward and the needs as future managers and project leaders, but also trying to bring up the math issues that you're thinking about. So we're trying to take a systems approach to this. And one thing we're thinking of is these certificates or other opportunities to bring people who might not be together for a few weeks to have a focus on various of these topics and have a credential that would be in common across these different education categories. Do you see anything like that? I mean, what do you think?
I haven't specifically seen anything like that at that level. I would say to you that, our organizations nationally, there are hundreds of folks just like me that do what I do in all of our markets. We're looking for that kind of collaboration. And if we can work with you and talk about what are the outcomes, right? Where are we today? Where do we want to go? We would fully embrace that. And I'm happy to help connect you to our larger network.
Yeah, I would love to. I would love to know in Minnesota who to talk to.
Exactly what we want to do. We on the contractor side, we have programs with different universities with construction management students where they're basically they do a green energy challenge project, which is really just this kind of holistic approach to this year's project was taking a facility in your market zero net. These chapters exist all over the country, but 100% of the construction management students that we had at Wayne State were placed with our contractors and working before they graduated. Oh. We need that. We need those pipelines. I mean, totally. So if anyone has programs like that, I would love them in my market, but I'd love to connect you with all my other markets because we're all trying to do the same thing. That 45% isn't a Detroit issue. It's an everywhere issue. So there's lots of opportunity.
Great. Yeah, this is great. There's a Big Ten and Friends group. So the Big Ten has an academic consortium where a partnership that would be at a national scale could be discussed. And I think,
I'd love that, Beth. That's great.
We could help you with that.
Awesome.
That would be a nice thing to pursue. But if you have a contact in Minnesota, particularly, that would be great.
Perfect.
Anyone else from the group? And don't feel pressured. I have like 40 more questions that you all submitted ahead of time too. So I can keep us going. John, it looks like you came off mute though.
Yes. One of the things universities may be able to do is provide courses, depending on what your structure and your requirements are, for trainees to get some of the things, maybe the specific training programs don't have in place, life skills, basic math, maybe even physical fitness, study skills, package some things together and make them available so trainees can get them to go along with the technical education that the programs are offering. At the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice in New Orleans and the Connected Worker Training Programs and hazardous waste certifications and so forth through NIH, they built this into the program as the beginning before you get to technical education after the orientation. Because as the speakers have mentioned, particularly Ms. Melford, those things are woefully lacking. And a lot of times it's an individual shortage based on exposure and just how they've been learning in terms of audiovisual and cultural stuff, right? They're intelligent folk, but these things are missing it. The things that we got, they didn't have anybody necessarily guiding them. So anyway, universities can be creative in developing something like that to help existing programs that can't build that in yet. I think that's a wonderful thing. And it helps also expose trainees and future workers to 4- and 2-year programs in a formal setting at a university. That was mentioned in the comments.
Yeah, so we're, we internally market and really message around completers for those associate degrees, because they have, almost an associate degree's worth of credits, and 4-year degree tracks. That's why NECA, the Electrical Contractor Association, partnered, to kind of develop this 4-year pathway. And I mean, I think in the electrical industry, we're about more education, whether it's technical field education that's delivered through an apprenticeship training center or for journeyman continue ed, but more is better. So that's our position. We're always looking for partnerships to help enhance that. I also think it's really important for young people, younger folks coming into our industry. And to me, that's, from 18 to 30, what is my career pathway, right? How can I pivot within this career so that we as employers don't lose our investment in them and growth, but how do we let them keep growing? And how do we keep expanding what this career can look like for them? I think it's just critical. It's critical for us as an industry to be able to speak to that and deliver it. So that's, I'm very passionate about that. I'm starting to talk with my hands, so I'll try to calm down, but I think it's nothing but opportunity. And I think it's really, really critical that we just, there's so many things you can do within our industry, but I don't feel like we have necessarily made that connectivity for our own people. And we need to do a better job of that. And typically it's in partnership with folks like you. So it's all good.
Well, let me do this. Let me do a quick thank you. I know we have Thanksgiving coming up next week, so it is a season for reflection. I want to obviously thank Ian and Jennifer for spending their time with us today. I also want to thank all of you participants for helping move this conversation along. I think it's a really critical topic, especially because we've been fortunate to be able to focus on university support, but there is obviously a massive talent pool out there that is really important to ensuring that this clean energy economy continues to make the speed and scale of progress that we need as a nation and a world, really, to meet some of these decarbonization challenges. I want to thank the WashU support team and Marsha McIntyre and Phil Valco also for running a really, really great conference. Remind you, and Alex, maybe if you can pull the slide up, that there is a closing keynote session after this that you are all welcome to join, even if you haven't RSVP'd yet. The link is also in chat if you just want to copy paste. I wish you all a safe and healthy holiday season. And maybe I'll go out. If you need to drop off, that's fine. We'll get started, I think, in 3 or 4 minutes on the keynote. But Ian and Jennifer, maybe if I can ask you to leave us with parting thoughts. A big portion of these panel discussions has been thinking about priority actions that we as the Midwest can take. They can be policy, they can be technical, they can be skills development, but are there 1 or 2 top things that your organization feels are really critical things that are either missing or that exist, but we need to continue to develop that will really address some of our pressing climate concerns over the next, 10 years to 2030?
Well, I can raise one that's really specific to this conversation around education and training. I think one area, we're talking some about diversity and inclusion, and I think one thing that is important is, talking about that, caring about it, and thinking about how we can address it. Because there are challenges, but we can address these challenges. And so, I think an interesting example is in Illinois, when there was legislation passed about almost 3 years ago now, they designed a program, the Illinois Solar for All program, and they built in sort of carve-outs for low income and disadvantaged communities to receive solar, but they also built in job training specifically for folks that had criminal records. And so this was like a really targeted thing where they said, hey, like we're gonna spend a bunch of money in this space. Let's do it in a way that can help address some of these inequities. And just beginning that conversation, I think, was really important, because once you start talking about it, like, I don't know if anyone was specifically against that, like, besides the fact that no one wants to be against, like, addressing inequities, like, it was sort of something that everyone could point to and say, hey, we're all excited that this is something that's happening. And so I think just bringing that up, and that's the Illinois Solar for All program. That's the overarching program, but a subcomponent of it is, training for solar jobs training for former incarcerated individuals. And so I think that's an important thing within the diversity bucket. I know that's not probably the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to addressing climate change, but I think it's important that we, are addressing these challenges together.
And I think from my perspective, as we look at these markets expanding or new technologies, there's plenty of room to create more electricians and electrical professionals, whether they're electricians in the field or on the contractor side, because our industry needs all those folks. They'll work in these new markets, and that's great, but they'll be able to also have the kind of this whole long career track and tail. So I would always just ask that everyone look back and go, we would be better to create a fully well-rounded electrician that can work in solar and wind and storage and EV, or is it just one really narrow thing? I think it's better, just in terms of how markets expand and contract, to offer a longer tail career track that's just bigger. That's my opinion.
And I think that actually marries really nicely with some of our conversations around the trends in higher ed, also around systems thinking, around broadening the interdisciplinarity of our curriculum, so that an environmental sciences student is not just going to go right and do field remediation work or work for the EPA, but it's a whole tool set that will allow them to be effective sustainability and climate professionals, no matter what they end up doing.
Yeah.
So let me use that as an opportunity to not upset Phil and Marcia and shoo you guys over to the plenary. But again, thank you to everybody. I wish you all an opportunity to enjoy the weather if you're enjoying the same weather that I am right now, unseasonably warm at the end of November. And again, thanks to Ian and Jennifer and all of you for joining this conversation. So we look forward to continuing it in the future. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Great job, Jeff.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ian and Jennifer.